Hello. I'm going to be reading today. I'm going to be reading Hitler's Wonderland by Michael Fry because this is Banned Books Week, which I did a stream last year about the whole banned books trend and how stupid it is. But this year I want to actually read something. So I picked up this book a couple months ago. I did post on Twitter about it when I got it. And it's very hard to find. I was looking for about 2 years, I guess, just every day searching, eBay, thrift books, Abe books, and anytime I traveled, I would go to all the bookstores in the area, and I never saw it. But then I finally saw it on eBay, and I decided to get it. And there are no electronic copies, as far as I know, anywhere. So you can't just get a PDF on archive.org or anything, to my knowledge at least. I wasn't able to find one. So now I have it, and I'm going to read it, and now everyone will have access to it if they want it. So I think that's cool. I know Antelope Hill said they wanted to publish, or republish, I guess, this book. But it doesn't go into the public domain until I think 2029, they said. So I don't care about that. So I'm just going to read it anyway. I don't care about public domain. But when they re-release it, you should probably buy it, maybe. Let's see. Oh, yeah. For this, I have to use display capture. For some reason, the Photos app on Windows just doesn't come through on window capture or anything. So that's why nothing's up right now. I looked on Google to see if there was a way to make it work. And there were people from like 2 or 3 years ago talking about this problem. And it just hasn't been fixed in all this time. So it sucks. But we got to do what we got to do. I just have YouTube and the Photos app up right now. So I shouldn't put up anything. I probably won't be showing anything accidentally if I screw something up. So that's pretty much all I can do, is try to make it as not incriminating as possible when using display capture. I remember last year for our banned book stream, I accidentally showed a bunch of stuff just browsing the internet. And I had to go through and edit it later. But we shouldn't have that problem this time. So here it is. Hopefully, yep, there it is. That's the cover. So it didn't come with the dust jacket, as you can tell. This is just the regular cloth cover. The dust jacket looks pretty cool, I think. But with a book this old, it's from 1934, so 90 years ago. You're just not gonna find many dust jackets still remaining. It's just how it is. I have Oswald Spengler's Hour of Decision, the 1934 copy, and that one has the dust jacket, and it's all torn apart. I mean, it's held together because it's in a sheet of plastic, and that's it. Is that the Barnes & Noble edition? Yeah, right off the banned books shelf. Go get it. So yeah, this book was published in 1934, and then it was shut down. They canceled the printing. They took it off the shelves. The official reason was something about a judge or a lawyer mentioned in this book, and they said it was like libel or whatever. It's hard to find conclusive information, but that's what I found. And I mean, I think we know the real reason. He's not, from what I saw, I was going through, I'm just taking pictures of the book because I don't have a scanner or anything. So I didn't read it, but I, read some stuff as I was going through. And he's not like a super like pro-Hitler guy or anything, but he does take what I think is a fair look at Germany at the time. And he criticizes them appropriately, and he praises them also. But at the time, the rest of the world was in the Great Depression, and then Germany, the supposed losers of the Great War, was seeing unprecedented growth under Hitler. So there was obviously a lot of resentment built up in that time period towards Germany, even then, even in the early 30s. But I tried to find some stuff also about the author, Michael Fry, and I found some things that were pretty interesting. So he was a British journalist living in Germany, and that's pretty much all we really know about the man himself, I guess, other than a date of birth and a date of death. But supposedly, I wasn't able to verify this with like a real source, but according to Wikipedia, his mother was a famous fascist activist named Leslie Fry, who was actually like a Russian. And, they fled Russia after the revolution. And she lived in America and he lived in England, and they changed their names. And that's what they say. But the source that she was his mother was an Ancestry.com page. And that page didn't load. So it's not exactly reliable, but it is a link if anyone is interested in trying to follow up on this author and see what he did in his lifetime or who his family was. I don't think his mother being a fascist activist made him more sympathetic to Hitler, at least based on my reading so far. I guess we'll see as we go along, because I've never read this, so it will be the first time. But he's not like super gung-ho about it, so I don't think he wrote this as like a propaganda piece from an activist standpoint or anything. And I guess we'll just start. That's about all I wanted to say as preliminary information. Obviously, this was written before the Holocaust and Kristallnacht and all that stuff, so there was this very small window of time where people could look at Germany fairly and with minimal bias, I guess, other than the bias remaining from the First World War, obviously. But yeah, we'll just go right in. So I omitted all the blank pages. I didn't see any reason to include those, but I did include all the front matter, and there's also like a bibliography in the back, so we can look at those. I'm not going to read every word on the page, but it'll be, I just want everything to be preserved in some form, including this person who wrote their name on the first page. I can't believe it. Fuck you, Becky. All right, and there you go. There's the title page. Pretty modern design, you could say. There's nothing really there. Then he has these quotes from Alice in Wonderland at the beginning of every chapter, and here at the beginning of the book. So we'll read that. Begin at the beginning, the king said gravely, and go on till you come to the end, then stop. And, published in London. Like I said before, he was a British journalist. 1934. And I meant to translate this before, but there's I think that's the dedication. In Mare, I think his mother, so dedicated to his mother, maybe. The supposed fascist activist, I guess. Here we have all the table of contents, all the chapters, and like I said, there's this bibliography at the end. I'm not sure how far we'll get today. I do want to finish this week, so I'm going to be reading this like probably every day this week because it's Banned Books Week. We got to celebrate. And we'll go through. I had planned to read everything uncensored So if he uses a term that might be considered a slur today or something, then I'm still going to say it. So if that bothers you, then close the page. But if you're here, then that probably doesn't bother you. So, yeah, just like when I read the Federalist Papers and they said the term Negro, it's just, that was the modern, at the time, language. That was the vernacular. So I plan to just stick with that. And we have the preface. So I was taking pictures of all these. Everything, some of these are kind of blurry, some lines of text, but I tried to make everything at least readable, because that's what I'm reading off of right now. I don't have the book, the physical book in front of me. So I'm just reading off the screen, and hopefully you can read everything. I'm looking at OBS right now, and it looks legible. So hopefully every page is good. So here we are with the preface. The thousands of people who took and still take a great deal of interest in the new Germany, and hundreds who made speeches about and wrote articles on Hitlerism, can be divided into two distinct classes. The first speak German fluently. They have lived in Germany before and after the Hitler Revolution. They have taken the trouble to study eugenic and economic conditions in Germany, and they are endowed with a modicum of intelligence which permits them to study the facts and draw their own conclusions. This first class is in a very small minority. The second class includes all those who cannot speak German, who were never in Germany, either before or after 1933, but who take an intelligent interest in world affairs. This class is obviously dependent on second-hand information. It knows nothing of Germany beyond what it reads in the daily newspapers and books. Now, due to the fact that a modern newspaper is more concerned with incidents and personalities than it is with abstract ideas, and due to the fact that a preference is given in the daily press to incidents of a definitely sensational and slightly lurid character, it happens that Hitlerism takes on a very distorted appearance when viewed through the columns of a newspaper. For example, all the small extraneous incidents which accompanied the rise of National Socialism in Germany were given undue prominence, while the fundamental idea of the Third German Reich was only considered in leading articles, which few people ever take the trouble to read. The helter-skelter agitation of many thousands of Nazis during the first months of the Hitler Revolution, the innumerable speeches, the parades, torchlight processions, banners and brass bands, manifestos, proclamations and decrees, the brutality of stormtroopers, persecution of social democrats, communists, and Jews, all those events became front-page news, and they were taken very seriously. Then came the Reichstag trial. Millions of people all over the world followed the proceedings with avidious interest, and the court took itself very seriously. This trial, the whole world cried, will irrevocably stamp Hitlerism with this or that. People went round with serious faces, every now and then glancing at a press photograph of poor little Martinez van der Lubbe, as if he could supply them with additional luridness. During this time, frantic reports were coming through from visitors to Germany. They had been maltreated by brown-shirted stormtroopers because they would not give the Nazi salute. One conscientious gentleman wrote to the Times that a friend of his had only been able to escape molestation in Berlin by wearing an English hat and carrying a copy of the Times ostentatiously. Donnerwetter. There was great excitement. It was subsequently discovered, after long polemics, that there was no way of characterizing an English hat, but no matter. Here was yet another example of man's inherent right to freedom being trampled in the mud by the brutal autocracy of brown fascism. The English hat had become the flaming symbol of liberal democracy, and a folded copy of the Times was turned into a golden sword with which to protect liberty, equality, and fraternity. The insolvable mystery is why, when these hundreds of futile incidents were reported in the world's press, a roar of laughter did not well forth from a billion throats. Has the world lost its sense of humor, or has it lost its power to think? There were so few men and women who realized that Hitlerism meant something 1,000 times vaster than terrorism, atrocity, and the Reichstag trial. It must be admitted that the average person cannot easily obtain a rational perspective of the new Germany, because the true significance of Hitlerism was completely swamped by hundreds of trifling occurrences which were pushed into the limelight. This was done so systematically that one is inclined to wonder whether the trees were purposely planted very thickly so that the world should not see the wood. In this book, I've tried to chop down a few of the fruitless trees that my readers could see that there is a great deal more in the force of Hitlerism besides the senseless brutality of stormtroopers and the exuberant agitation of well-meaning Nazis. London, 1934. So there was something I was going to comment on here. So I don't plan this to be like an audiobook, you know. Just like with the Federalist Papers, I made comments as I finished chapters and stuff. So I don't plan to interrupt in the middle of a sentence or anything, but after a chapter, you know, we can chat. Oh yeah, there's a lot of German in this book. I noticed that as I was going through, and I don't speak German. I will try to pronounce words as they are in the text, but in some places he has the English translation next to the German, and I plan to, in those cases, I plan to just read the English and not the German. But otherwise, if it's just German, I'll make an attempt. I've read a bit of literature from this era, so they're words that I'm used to. You know, you see, you know, the Volksgemeinschaft and whatever, but this one has copious amounts of German, and we'll just deal with it. And of course, nowadays, you know, you can't find anyone willing to have like a serious, reasonable conversation about what Hitlerism was, or Nazism, or whatever you want to call it. People are just, they get distracted, you know. They get focused on, you know, the Holocaust, the war, all this stuff, and then they ignore that there was this political movement, and, you know, that political movement had ideas and stuff. And he kind of talks about that here. Even back then, I guess, people were getting distracted by these events. All right, Chapter 1, Chaos and Communism. And they all quarrel so dreadfully one can't hear oneself speak, and they don't seem to have any rules in particular. Take a large country placed in the very center of Europe, create a complete chaos in its government, give it over 8 million unemployed men and women, let corruption flourish in the civil service, private enterprises, and police circles, permit the establishment of a strong communist party, reduce the prosperity of industry, commerce, and agriculture to a minimum, and finally, let all classes be swept by a wave of mental apathy and uncensored immorality, and you can be sure that something will eventually happen. That was Germany in 1932. The disintegration which had taken place in political, economic, and moral spheres was such that only a powerful upheaval could restore the country to a rational and normal level of civilization. What particular form this upheaval took is a secondary consideration. Whether it was to be a return to monarchy, another revolution, or the establishment of a dictatorship did not matter. Something had to happen, and something did. The German government of 1932 was a farce, and utterly incapable of dealing with the problems of the nation. How could they, when Parliament was the scene of constant bickerings between different political parties? And what a collection of parties, the communists on the extreme left of the Reichstag, clamoring for the overthrow of anything that savored of being bourgeois. Next to them, the Social Democrats who, if a little less violent in their proposals, advocated a form of advanced socialism inspired by Karl Marx. In cases of emergency, i.e., when a particularly bourgeois motion was put forward, communists and social democrats would join forces and put a spoke in the other party's wheel. Coming down towards the center of Parliament, there were the Democrats, who played a gentle game of seesaw between the Catholic Party on their right and the Social Democrats on their left. Composed of cultured men, doctors, lawyers, etc., it is a mystery how this party found the inclination to side with the trade unionists and workers who sat on their left. In fact, the position of these educated men appears still more peculiar when one considers that on their right sat the Catholic Party, composed of reactionary peasants and workers, with a strong tendency to join the extreme left. Next to the Catholics, who sat in the center, came the so-called People's Party, made up of the representatives of big business. A steadying influence in the Reichstag This party naturally voted wherever it could see profit to themselves. It was flanked on the right by the Nationalists, the remnant of Germany's traditional landed gentry and aristocracy, Junkers, members of the upper middle class and ex-officers. Finally, on the extreme right sat the National Socialist Party, whose numbers gradually increased until, in 1932, when this account opens, they wielded a strong vote in the Reichstag. None of the 6 other important parties ever imagined that time that these National Socialists would shorten their name to Nazis, put on uniforms, and throw them all out of office. And there's a footnote here. The Nazis, the abbreviation of National Socialism. National Socialism. Okay. To the casual observer, it would appear that even with 7 different parties in Parliament, a government could manage to carry on their business. Of course, compared to the United States or England, the number 7 seems a large one. But then there were more than 7 parties. There were approximately 38, 7 large ones and about 31 smaller ones, so small that they were called splinter parties. Nevertheless, they were quite large enough to create confusion when occasion arose. Even assuming that each splinter party only disposed of 2 votes, that meant at least 60 votes which would be cast now to the left, now to the right, without any semblance of order or constructive policy. Such was the state of Germany's parliament in 1932. Besides political chaos, there was a partial disorganization of industry, commerce, and agriculture. Industry was crippled by taxes on turnover and profits, tariffs mounted up, and the output of factories was constantly retarded by communist and trade union strikes. Commerce, already heavily weighed down by the provisions of the Young Plan, suffered from the reduced purchasing power of the public. Nevertheless, commerce and industry were prosperous compared to agriculture. Agriculture, which had always been Germany's strong point, was in a sorry state. It is estimated that the farmers owed the banks and loan trusts over 5 billion marks, on which they paid a yearly interest of at least 500 million marks. Direct taxes on the small farmers came to 150 million marks a year, while indirect taxes amounted to about 5 billion marks. Farm laborers had their wages reduced from 10 to 30%. Not a day passed without the compulsory seizure of numerous farms for distraint on loans. Here we have a quote. Germany was the first European country to be affected by the developing world crisis. Production fell and unemployment rose. According to estimates made by the Berlin Finanzpolitische Correspondence, the average weekly wages of industrial workers fell as follows. In the summer of 1929, they were 44.60. I don't know what the term would be. Reichsmarks. They fell to 20.8 marks in August 1932, and since then they have fallen still farther. The Finanzpolitische Correspondence estimates the total wage reductions of workers and employees in Germany from July 1929 to July 1932 at approximately 38 billion marks, at par about 1.9 billion pounds. Together with the wage and salary reductions, there was also a tremendous rise in unemployment, according to the official figures of the Reich Ministry of Labor. Unemployment rose to over 6 million. The official Trade Research Institute, however, showed that these official figures were not comprehensive, as they covered only those workers who were reporting at the labor exchanges. That in addition to the visible unemployed, there were also many invisible. On the basis of the health insurance statistics, which cover all unemployed persons, the invisible unemployment amounted to approximately 2 millions. The Institute estimated the figures at 8 million in the winter of 1931 to 32, and over 7 million in the third quarter of 1933, the best season. But even these figures did not accurately reflect the position. They did not include the hundreds of thousands of persons who had been unemployed for several years and were walking through the streets of the towns as beggars or wandering through Germany as tramps. Nor did they include the destitute children and the young unemployed who could find no work when they left school. They did not include the hundreds of thousands of small merchants and tradespeople, of people who had formerly been independent, and professional people who were living on the verge of starvation and were in fact unemployed. The real number of unemployed at the end of 1932 must be put at somewhere round about 9 million. According to a statistical inquiry made by Theodore Geiger, the proportion of the various classes in the total number of occupied persons is capitalists 0.84%, old middle class, small proprietors 18.33%, new middle class, officials, employees, etc., 16.04%, proletarians, workers on own account, small traders, etc., 13.76%, and proletariat, 51.03%. The crisis brought wide sections of the middle class down into the proletariat. The number of bankruptcies rose. Compulsory sales became more and more frequent. The small tradespeople of the towns and the small peasants were particularly severely hit. And the crisis hit sections of people who had hitherto not been affected. The standard of living of teachers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, writers, artists fell lower and lower. An investigation undertaken by the Hartmann-Bund, the officially recognized doctors' association, showed that in 1932, 70% of the German medical profession were earning less than 170 marks a month, at par, £8 and 10 cents. The German Legal Association found that its members were in much the same position. The immense burden of reparations sharpened the crisis. The promises and hopes of the Dawes Plan and Locarno Treaty were not fulfilled. The Young Plan of 1929 made a new regulation of debts, which brought fresh opportunities for the German capitalists to transfer the burden to the workers. End quote. And that's from the Brown Book of Hitler Terror, pages 30, 31, and 32. Small wonder that the working class, together with the impoverished small middle class, should have turned to communism, whose agitators promised wealth and happiness when Germany became Soviet Germany. Communism grew to amazing proportions. In countries like the United States or England, it is difficult to imagine how such a state of things can occur. In England, for instance, communism is not taken seriously. The activities of the Reds being mostly confined to speeches in Hyde Park on Sundays, speeches to which the workman listens patiently but which, an hour later, are driven out of his mind by the more serious problems of racing or league football. In the United States, where the workman usually received a higher wage than the average white-collar man, revolutionary propaganda fell on barren soil until recently, when the Depression had caused unrest in the masses. It is not within the scope of this book to discuss the theory of communism, whether it is practicable or not. No country in the world has yet applied the principles of Bolshevism with success, least of all Soviet Russia. The Soviet government have had 17 years in which to prove the efficacy of communism. I leave it to the others to write on the result of the Soviet regime. The fact is that to let a communist party take over the control of a large country like Germany would have been a very dangerous experiment, and Hitler is not to be blamed for refusing to let the nation take the risk. The organization of the Communist Party in 1932 is magnificent. It is almost a pity that the entire structure, with its manifold ramifications, should have been destroyed by the Nazis. Some of the purely socialist leagues did good work in their own way. Red propaganda was particularly well done. Contributions from 1 million supporters made it possible to set up cinemas, theaters, and wireless broadcasting stations, all for the propagation of communist ideas. Motion picture films and traveling troupes of actors were very numerous. They helped to spread the doctrine in the provinces and remote villages. So it sounds like some things never change. Communism and the workers. Down with the bourgeois, food and money for the workers, and similar slogans were bound to appeal to the working classes whose standard of living had fallen very low. Although out of 21 million so-called proletarians, including domestic servants, only 100,000 were registered members of communist societies. The number of passive supporters was enormous. As it is, 100,000 men actively engaged in furthering the Soviet cause are a great danger. Because each man has an unlimited radius of influence on his comrades. If each man instilled anarchist ideas into the minds of only 10 friends, it would mean an additional billion recruits to the cause. The actual organization established for the workers was similar to communist methods used throughout the world. A number of cells were established in the towns and inside industrial and commercial concerns. On January 1st, 1932, the number of these cells was put down at 1,800. Out of 70 large factories employing more than 5,000 workers, there were 35 which nursed a communist cell in their bosom, so to speak. Out of 1,000 smaller factories, 350 were supplied with anarchist centers. One of the functions of these cells was to publish a cell newspaper. When I say newspaper, I am insulting the press, because these publications were usually cheap sheets of paper printed on a duplicating machine. The sort of leaflet that is usually associated with communists, plenty of red ink, exaggerated statements, and foul language. Nevertheless, they were important factors in sowing the seeds of dissatisfaction, distrust, and class hatred in the hearts of the workers who read them. There were approximately 500 of these cell newspapers in Germany, constituting an underground press that can neither be controlled nor banned by the government. A certain number of cells together would be controlled by a group office. These in turn were governed by district offices and so on, until the highest point of the Communist Party organization was reached. Apart from distributing its printed propaganda, the cell organized strikes and walkouts whenever possible. If it could not start a proper strike, it taught the workers to commit acts of sabotage, dropping tools into revolving machinery, cutting pulley straps, etc. Some factories retaliated by giving their employees a share in the profits. Very few workers cared to retard the output after that. But on the whole, there was a tremendous amount of willful damage done in factories by communists or workers who had been influenced by red propaganda. The cell, too, was responsible for organizing parades, hunger marches, and other public demonstrations, where revolutionary speeches were made, protests voiced, and a few shop windows smashed. In short, the cells were responsible for all the dirty work, while the communist members of the Reichstag attacked the government by legal methods. The large number of these anarchist cells was in itself a danger to order in industry and commerce. The success of their corruption, secret propaganda, and Sovietizing was shown in the 1932 elections when the Communist Party obtained over 6 million votes. That number keeps coming up. Interesting. Communism for the unemployed. The activity of revolutionary organizations among the workers was slightly reduced during the years 1931 and 1932, because jobs had become so scarce that no worker liked to jeopardize his own by openly carrying on anarchist work. But what the communists lost on the swings, they made on the roundabouts, because the unemployed came to join the party in such numbers as to compensate fully the decline in the activity of workers' cells. For the benefit of the unemployed, there was created a street cell whose chief aim was to incite the millions of jobless men to open revolt against the state. In 1931, there were 3,000 of these street cells. At the beginning of 1932, they had doubled their number. 6,000 centers of anarchy, spreading discontent among 6 million unemployed. A very fruitful soil, too. Unemployment rots away all the strength in a man's character. He becomes desperate and is ready to do anything to obtain money and food, knowing that he has nothing to lose and everything to gain. Day after day, the street cells carried on their subversive propaganda. If the unemployed wanted money and food, they said, all they had to do was to join the Communist Party. The Soviet Union would take care of them. Organize mass meetings, hunger marches, supply pickets for brother workers on strike, throw bricks at shop windows, steal food from provision stores. All that was included in the program of festivities. How well they succeeded in their work is shown by the newspapers at the time. Not a day passed without some new law-breaking act being committed by bands of unemployed. And it's been so long since I've done a reading stream, my throat's already starting to get dry. But I have tea here. It's not cold enough to drink yet. So we'll have to struggle through for a little bit at least. And for the farmers, one is tempted to think that red propaganda would find no response from the peasants. The German farmer, a hard-working, God-fearing man, seemed far removed from Karl Marx and his myrmidons. History, however, shows that the farmer is one of the most violent revolutionaries in existence, but only when he feels that his land is in danger. A farmer's small piece of land, which has come down to him from generation to generation, is his whole raison d'etre, his whole life. He does not look on his farm solely as a corn and meat producer, but also as a holy inheritance from his ancestors. Then try and take a farmer's land away from him and see what happens. How many bailiffs who attempted to seize property for distraint have been beaten off with pitchforks and flails? During the last 2 years before Hitler, these peasant uprisings became particularly frequent. The farmers recognized that they owed money, but that was no reason for confiscating their beloved land. I have already shown how heavily the farmer was weighed down by taxes of all sorts and how far he had become indebted to banks and loan companies. The position grew so bad that in desperation, he turned to communism as a possible remedy for his troubles. The farmers formed several farmers' congresses. They organized mass resistance against bailiffs and tax collectors, protest meetings, etc. all under the direction of the Communist Party. At the same time, red propaganda was disseminated in the villages by agents from the cities who flooded the countryside with anarchist leaflets. The Sovietizing of the land was considerably helped by the Ostdorf scandal, which broke out in 1932, when the farmers saw that the sums allotted to them by the government had been dishonestly appropriated by some of the landlords and state officials. Their fury knew no bounds when they welcomed the emissaries of Moscow with open arms. Quite naturally, these agents hastened to promise the farmers and farm laborers justice against the Junkers and the state. The outcome was that, at the end of 1932, the German farmers, corrupted by subversive propaganda, fast threatened to become a menace to peace and order. And I can kind of relate to this idea about the government confiscating land from farmers, because my family had a farm in the early 1900s, I guess, and then around World War II, it was seized by the government. So just several generations of land gone. But at the time, there was the war, so if you opposed the government seizing land, then that was unpatriotic. Whereas here, they could revolt and join the communists. All right, communism for the women. As a start, there were 12 members out of 77 communist parliamentarians who were women. There was a women's section of German Communist Party, an offshoot to the parent organization. There was the International Women's Secretariat, led by a woman, Comrade Modrova. There were women's sections in the purely militant organizations, such as the League for Fighting Fascism and the Rothilfe. Moscow also provided the women with a large number of publications like Women's Path, the Workers' Sexual Newspaper, Birth Control and Abortion, etc., whose avowed aim was, quote, to free German women from their bonds, end quote. The practical result was a gradual destruction of the sanctity of marriage and family spirit on the lines of what was done in Soviet Russia. Women of the working classes were fed the same propaganda as the men, plus an insidious campaign against the strictness of the German law forbidding abortion. In this case, the slogan was, "Woman has a right to her own body," and huge protest meetings were held in Berlin and provincial towns. Many other publications of a pornographic nature that were destined to women will be described later. Free love was advocated in many of these books, and the cry was, "Look at the women in the Soviet Union, how happy they are in their freedom from the silly restrictions of a bourgeois regime." It is only fair to recognize that the communist propaganda for women's freedom did some good, especially among the women of the lower classes, while the general result of diffusing Soviet doctrines was a weakening of morals and family ties. It served the purpose of educating women in the matter of personal hygiene, a thing which was as badly needed in Germany as it is in most countries. Nevertheless, the education should have been done by the government instead of leaving it to the communists, who added anarchy to their teachings and thus undermined the civic morality and patriotism of many thousands of women. Just imagine the smell. Corruption of youth and children. One of the most important branches of the Communist Party was the Communist Youth League. Boasting about 40,000 members, this organization was closely allied to the Young Pioneers, whose adherents numbered about 28,000, and various other youth organizations. The total is approximately 200,000 Soviet-minded youths and children of both sexes, counting only the registered members of societies. Again, there was wheat among the chaff in the shape of sports clubs for young workers of both sexes, but the physical good done by these clubs was more than offset by the moral corruption, which was their chief aim. Youth was taught to prepare for the day when the proletariat would arise and overthrow capitalists and bourgeois. Publications like Be Prepared, Enslaved Youth, and Youth of the Third International all preached the gospel of anarchy and revolt. A verse out of the Young Pioneers' anthem gives an idea of the spirit that was being instilled into the hearts of future German citizens. Quote, "Long live Soviet Russia, for we are already marching. We have begun the assault as a proof of the people's revolution. leap up on the barricades, come out for the Civil War, yes, war, hoist the Soviet flags as a sign of our bloody victory. In the chorus, we are not afraid of the Reich's banner, nor of the Stahlhelm and the Nazis. We are going up and over. Be prepared. End quote. A song which obviously did nothing to develop the love of their fatherland in the hearts of youths and young girls. Realizing that the best method of paving the way for Der Sowjettag was to Sovietize the children, the amount of subversive propaganda that was done in schools and working class districts was enormous. Every conceivable means of teaching children to hate the government and society in general was employed by the communists. School children had their newspaper, The Drum, while hundreds of schools published small leaflets and tracts. Games were used to corrupt children's minds. One in particular was called Around the Soviet Star, and taught the children to consider the police, the state, and the bourgeois as mortal enemies. Childishness, it is true. But what hope was there of making an orderly citizen out of a child who grew up with anarchist ideas? Take another game that was very popular with the children. The players form a circle. One of them, who is meant to represent Uncle Sam, the American dollar capitalist, stands in the center of the ring. The players then raise their fists and make a rush at Uncle Sam, who pulls the Bible out of his pocket and shakes it at his attackers. The Bible is snatched out of his hand and passed around the circle. The last one to have it shouts, and then throws the Bible at Uncle Sam's head. The circle then closes in again with loud yells. Uncle Sam pulls a bottle out of his pocket and pretends it is full of rum. This is also snatched away and goes around the circle, and all the players take an imaginary drink out of it. They then do a wild dance around Uncle Sam, who is finally pounced upon with much shouting and carried away to prison. There were scores of games of that type, all aiming to bring up German children in the hatred of their own country and the love of Soviet Russia. A deplorable state of affairs. However inefficient the government of a country, the youth of that country should not be allowed to grow up without some feeling of patriotism in its heart. Stinky, yeah, they didn't teach the women how to bathe before the communists came around. Communist terrorist groups. The culmination of communist efforts to Sovietize Germany was the formation of a number of organizations with a purely militant aim. One of their songs, chosen at random, gives an idea of the spirit. Quote, "When the church, the school, the state stand wrapped in flames, when the soldiers' barracks are destroyed, then the seed we have planted will bloom." End quote. In 1929, the famous Red Front Fighters League was declared illegal by the government. It continued to exist nevertheless. This league was nothing else but a miniature Soviet army. The members wore uniforms similar to the one worn by Soviet soldiers, and each one was armed to the teeth. Besides the secret existence of the Red Army, there were several apparently harmless associations like the Workers' Protection League, the Workers' Self-Protection League, etc., which were in reality armed bands of men ready to start a revolution at any moment. In compiling this chapter, I have been careful not to exaggerate the importance of communism in Germany. An undeniable fact is that the position was a serious one, serious enough to cause anxiety. There were over 1 million active communists in 1932. The elections of that year brought the Communist Party over 6 million votes out of an electorate of some 20 millions. Adding to that the large number of communist organizations, their powerful press, and their methods of attack, there can be only one conclusion. And there's a footnote here. The number of these organizations was put down at about 80. Organization of the Communist Party, published by that magazine or publication in Berlin. And there can be only one conclusion. Communism was a danger to the German nation, a danger which had to be completely destroyed if the Reich was to become an orderly and civilized state. And people always draw parallels between the Weimar era in Germany and kind of the modern West. And you can see a lot of those in this chapter, like, the discouragement of patriotism and such things. Is my tea cold enough yet? No. All right, chapter 2. Organized immorality. I never heard of uglification, Alice ventured to say. What is it? If there is one excuse to be found for communists and their activities, is that they are, after all, fighting for an idea, frequently with the prospect of personal gain as an added inducement. Communism, like liberalism or socialism, is an economic system, stripped of its revolutionary aspect. The policy of the leaders is constructive. But there is nothing constructive about immorality. Wherever it is left to flourish, it destroys without building anything new to take the place of the old. In Germany, immorality was the order of the day for many years before the advent of the Third Reich. Demoralization, disintegration, Germany running full speed ahead towards an inevitable destruction of civilization. Germany leading the way with the rest of the world following along more slowly. Organized demoralization, subversive forces at work, undermining the moral health of the nation. Subversive propaganda, which some German writers have blamed on the communists, with injustice because, although that ill-fated party already had numerous sins to its account, depraving the entire nation was not one of them. It is true that they spread the gospel of immorality among the working classes, but they had no influence with the bourgeois, and certainly not with the upper classes, and those were the two classes that suffered most from disintegration. If a link must be forged between immorality and communism, it would be fairer to say that both communism in its militant form and the subversive propaganda in question were issued from the same source, perhaps some all-powerful secret organization having for its aim the overthrow of present-day civilization. An international society with its headquarters in Germany. This theory is not so far-fetched as it sounds. It is borne out by the fact that while immorality was organized in Germany on a larger scale than elsewhere, Germans are so thorough, it flourished simultaneously throughout Europe and the United States. By subversive propaganda is meant the publication and open sale of pornographic literature, the production of plays and films dealing almost entirely with the seamier side of sex, encouragement of free love, nudist movements, literature, plays and films glorifying the exploits of the underworld, tolerance and furtherance of various vices and aberrations, propagation of advanced thought, i.e., usually the negation of most of the principles of honesty, decency, and purity upon which Christian civilization is founded, the cult of the ugly in art, and many other manifestations of what came to be called modernism. Hitler had a word for all of that. Culture Bolshevismus. The Bolshevization of culture. The great mistake the Nazis made when they started their war against culture Bolshevismus, or I guess it would be Bolshevismus. Okay, that makes a little more sense. Was that they did not attempt to explain to the outside world the precise nature of what they were fighting. In that way, a great number of separate incidents took on the shape of senseless persecutions, when actually they were part of a greater campaign for moral regeneration. How much of this culture Bolshevismus still goes on outside Germany? Modernism is nearly always blamed on the war. There is talk of the usual reaction following a great strain, which, of course, is an effortless way of explaining a complex problem. It happens that the war was ended 16 years ago, while the so-called reaction is still flourishing. Some wonders how long it will be before war-stricken humanity ceases to react. Laying aside all ostensibly plausible arguments explaining the modern world, it must be admitted that practically every civilized nation has been and is being swept by a wave of degeneration. Germany happened to be hit the hardest, one of the reasons for that being that most of the subversive propaganda was presented in the form of science, and the Germans just loved that. That sounds awfully familiar. Commercialized pornography. Under a democratic government, the publication and sale of pornographic literature had reached an unprecedented degree of freedom. Books and magazines dealing with sex, sexual aberrations, vices, and so on were openly displayed in bookshops and on bookstalls. They were placed on tables in public reading rooms, and nothing was done to prevent them from falling into the hands of adolescents or children of both sexes. This literature was sold at popular prices ranging from 6 pence to 5 shillings. One of the most popular magazines was the monthly Aufklärung, the Enlightenment. A well-chosen title because readers were fully enlightened on every conceivable aspect of the sex question. It was a large magazine printed on expensive paper. It was always full of photographs, most of them taken from life, which left nothing to the imagination. The working class, too, was supplied with its workers' sexual newspaper, in which there was a question and answer column where readers could have their most intimate sexual problems discussed and explained. Needless to say, this newspaper taught its readers that most of the world's sexual aberrations were directly caused by capitalism and religion. Out of the pile of lewd books and pamphlets, one could choose at random a book dealing with every aspect of prostitution and giving a description of the atrocities committed in some disorderly houses, another giving a photographic display of numerous erotic practices, a series of pamphlets describing alleged immorality in country villages, in the working class and the upper class, etc. To crown all that, the Homosexuality League in Berlin was so well organized that it could afford to publish a newspaper of its own. Homosexuality was further brought to the public attention by a book called Zwischen Männern, in which the author, Richard Linsert, pleaded for a reform of the laws punishing certain homosexual practices. Innumerable pamphlets and books either waged a ceaseless war on the law forbidding illegal operations or else preached the sexual liberation of women as it exists in Soviet Russia. First in the field was the monthly magazine Die Ehe, would that be? I don't know. Marriage, edited by Dr. Levi Lenz. Frau Dr. Ruben Wolf's pamphlet called Abortion or Prevention sold well over 250,000 copies. To all this, add a miscellaneous collection of profusely illustrated books and magazines dealing with every known form of vice and perversion, and you have the sum total of Germany's contribution towards the advancement of civilization. Undoubtedly, vices have to be studied by the medical profession with a view to their treatment and cure, but it is difficult to find an excuse for publishing details of abominable aberrations in books that are openly on sale to the public. It is interesting to see how much these publications were in demand in Germany, as the following letter shows. This is a letter from Cologne. I guess that would be June 5th, 1928. Illustrated Magazine Company, Berlin. Dear Sirs, we are obliged to state that despite strict surveillance in our reading rooms, your publications are constantly being stolen by the public. We therefore enclose an order for 10 more copies, yours, etc. Soon after the advent of Hitler, a strict censorship was instituted on all publications sold openly to the public, and a large number of publishers were forcibly closed down. Anti-Hitlerites are fond of citing these facts as examples of the Nazi campaign against culture. The Nazis destroyed a unique collection of exhibits, quite unique, together with piles of filthy books and photographs. These were apparently of great public importance. And these quotes are from the Brown Book of Hitler Terror, page 166. Quite naturally, if the uncensored publications issued by a large variety of cheap publishers belonged to the realm of culture, then Hitler should be severely condemned for retarding the progress of civilization. On the other hand, if culture and pornography are synonymous, as was undoubtedly the case in Germany, then for the sake of Christian civilization and the moral health of coming generations, it would be much safer to abolish culture. Nudism. A great deal of ink has already flown over this comparatively recent manifestation of modernism. Scores of eminent doctors have upheld it, and an equal number of no less eminent doctors have condemned it. Paris has its nudist camps. They exist in England, and certain states of America are overrun with them. But once again, Germany led the world in the matter of nudism on a large scale. Whatever benefits to the human body may be derived from life in the nude, it is only common sense that a return to nature is just one way of allowing shamelessness and licentiousness to take the place of decency and restraint. Nudity can hardly be called an advancement of the cause of culture, because it is said to have been extensively practiced by primeval man thousands of years ago. Nudism is merely the revival of a very old and barbaric custom. To the large number of nudist camps dotted over the face of Germany must be added the institution of mixed bathing in the nude in the metropolitan swimming baths. In the Young Guard, June 10th, 1931, there is a photograph of one of these bathing evenings organized in Berlin. Needless to say, youths and maidens are shown frolicking about in puris naturalibus. Needless to say, too, that these nudist bathing parties were extremely popular. The chief propagandists for the nudist movement were a Jew who started his own nudist gymnasia in Berlin and Hamburg, another with a book called Physical Culture and the Nude. Numerous communist societies also helped the good work. All right, my tea is drinkable now, so I'll take a little break and drink some of this tea. Nudie commie ditty parties at Pick the Right Stream, yeah, they were all about it. All right, we'll continue on. Immorality in the cities. With innumerable German and Austrian publishers turning out pornographic magazines and books, it was only natural that the public should be supplied with places where all this culture could be put into practice. The corrupt administration of the cities did not censor filthy books, so why should it forbid pervert clubs, homosexuality leagues, or daisy bars? On the contrary, let all these vice resorts flourish. They are institutions of public importance, as a short tour of Berlin will prove. The El Dorado will be our starting point. The time is anywhere between 10 in the evening and 4 in the morning. The entrance to the place is like the usual entrance into a nightclub. Bright lights, attendant in uniform, and so on. There are several rooms to choose from. We will take the largest, in which scores of tables are packed around a small dance floor. The band is turning out hot jazz. Couples slither listlessly around the floor, and the air is thick with smoke. Let us take a table in the corner, so that you can see what is going on. Order your drink, and then perhaps you would like to dance. Sorry, I keep coughing. Order your drink, and then perhaps you would like to dance. What about that rather pretty blonde girl over there, the one in the blue satin dress? Ask her to dance, by all means. But before you do, may I mention that she happens to be a man? A man that, like you or me, are perhaps not quite the same. That blonde girl is one of Berlin's daisies, who are men dressed in the latest Paris fashions, wearing wigs of beautifully curled hair and their faces painted to perfection. Now that your eye is trained, you can pick out 50 of these daisies at a glance. Most of them are rather unattractive. That is because we are in the El Dorado, the popular resort. For those who can afford them, there are smaller, more exclusive nightclubs, where you find no creatures with rough chins dressed in imitation Paris models. There you would see the cream of the daisies, the beau monde of homosexuality, the better class of male prostitutes of which Berlin, Hamburg, Stuttgart, Munich, Cologne, etc. are full. Once more in the street. As we go along, I can point out a dozen of these male streetwalkers in the Kurfürstendamm or the Potsdamer Straße. There is quite a collection. Notice how they accost the men, competing with women in the oldest profession in the world. Now we are going to a place known as a Kaffir dance hall. There are similar places in New York and Paris, but whereas there is some sort of restraint in those, there is none at all in this. Have you ever heard of the mad orgies that take place in certain parts of South Africa? The natives call them chinyaos, and they hold them at midnight in the depth of a forest. We are going to a chinyao in the center of Berlin, held at any time between sunset and sunrise. The music, you will notice, is one continuous pulsating rhythm, monotonous and enervating. The dancers are packed closely in a mass, and the dancing itself is more than suggestive. But it is nothing compared to the real thing, which will be shown when the Negro Cabaret comes on. Then you will see the barbaric sensuality of the ages expressed in every movement of the dance, as hundreds of respectable Germans see it every night. I say Germans because you must not think that Berlin nightlife is confined to foreigners, as it usually is in Paris. Here it is said to be part of the Kulturförderung, the advancement of culture. One can understand Mr. Wyndham Lewis when he wrote, quote, "Sooner or later he, a Nazi stormtrooper, would desire to be at the head or in the midst of this Sturmabteilung, the stormtroop, to roll this nigger dance luxury spot up like a verminous carpet and drop it into the spree with a heartfelt phooey at its big sodden splash." And that's Hitler by Wyndham Lewis, which you can still buy that book today. I believe Antelope Hill publishes it. So that's a book that's still around. A taxi will take us to another place where you'll see practiced the more refined types of vice, For an entrance fee of 5 or 10 marks, you receive a sort of promenade ticket, which allows you to visit the various amusement salons. Of course, adolescents are not allowed to come in here, and there is a notice at the door. Persons under 16 are not admitted. What you will see in this Laster locale is the vilest of the vile. The alliance of sexual impulses with those of barbaric cruelty gives rise to the most appalling vices. A detailed description of them will be found in some of the books mentioned previously and obtainable at any bookseller. To be modern, one must be broad-minded. One must be prepared to accept African chinyaos and the vice dens of Port Said, maybe. But to these members of one's own white race, presumably fellow Christians, indulging in the unbridled expression of degenerate bestiality is more than one can bear without a strong feeling of nausea. That was the West End of Berlin, a collection of the lowest resorts catering to the depravity of human nature, in the heart of Germany's capital. How many of these resorts were there? No one can say, but during the first days of the revolution, Hitler forcibly closed down 80 such haunts within a radius of a mile from the Potsdamer Platz, while the Gestapo is still busy suppressing the more secret vice dens in Berlin and elsewhere. And Gestapo is the secret state police. What went on in the capital was naturally copied in the provinces, and while the nation was being corrupted on every side, the government sat back and did nothing. Some spasmodic attempts were made in different parts of the country to stem the tide of degeneration, but with little result. In January 1928, public prosecutor Kuhorst of Stuttgart forbade the sale of 2 books. These were confiscated by the police and burned. What happened? 1,000 citizens of Leipzig organized a monster protest meeting against Kuhorst's actions. They claimed that he was acting under the influence of a mad fantasy when he banned them. Famous lawyers made impassioned speeches about the outrage to modern culture, and the outcome of it all was that after a ban of 6 months' duration, these books were back on the bookstalls, and public prosecutor Kuhorst got it in the neck for daring to interfere with the cause of science. It may be that, having read so far, a few of my readers will show incredulity and wonder whether I have not exaggerated, to which I would, under other circumstances, reply, go and see for yourself. Unfortunately, no one can do that now, because Hitler has cleaned up all the vice and filth, which I have chronicled here. Immoral Germany is a thing of the past. Only those who knew the Reich in 1932 can vouch for the truth of my statements. Will Mr. Wyndham Lewis allow me to call him up as a witness? He once named Berlin, in pre-Hitler days, the capital of vice. Moreover, I doubt whether a foreigner visiting Germany today would have the opportunity of seeing a collection of the pornographic publications that used to cover the bookstalls. Everything has been confiscated and burned, and the sources destroyed, excepting, of course, the usual secret and restricted distribution of lewd books which exists in every large town. But uncensored and untrammeled sale of such literature is no more, and it is quite useless trying to find the El Dorado and similar nightclubs because they have also disappeared. So the reader who did not see for himself will have to believe that the state of affairs I described really did exist, and a great deal more besides, which would undoubtedly be censored in publication. Which reminds me of what one prolific producer of lewd literature told me some time ago. Because we publish advanced literature, he said, why blame Germany's immorality on us? Blame it on the public and its morals, or lack of them. Because after all, we're only giving the public what it wants. A singularly specious argument. The public, in Germany and elsewhere, did not want immorality and pornography, but it accepted them both when they were offered. The public never wants anything. All it can do is approve or disapprove of whatever literature, the theater, or the cinema offer it in the way of entertainment. The masses did not send in a petition to film producers asking for sex films, but when these films were shown in the cinemas, the people enjoyed them, and finally made a habit of them. Anything that appeals to the lower side of human nature is sure of finding a large and appreciative audience. Consequently, it is the duty of those who provide entertainment to the masses to see what they do, not pander to, or stimulate the bestial instincts of man. So this quote here is, I used to hear this all the time nowadays, this very same quote, almost word for word from, thousands of people. So it's pretty impressive. This chapter talking about the rampant degeneracy of the times and how it kind of lines up with today. Especially the part with the daisies. I mean, you can't help but laugh. You can't do anything else. The only other option is to cry, so just laugh. Anti-religious movements. Sooner or later, the subversive forces undermining the morality of German citizens were doomed to come in conflict with the Church. For once, Catholic and Protestant creeds stood united against the common enemy, demoralization. They were powerless, however, against the superb organization of their opponents, their unlimited funds for propaganda, and especially the attractive way in which this very demoralization was presented. Not content with harming the Church by leading its faithful away from the proverbial straight and narrow path, various organizations launched a campaign against religion itself. The International Union of Freethinkers and the Federation of Proletarian Free Thought were two of the most powerful of these anti-religious societies. Their publications, The Atheist and The Freethinker, the Strong Communist Press was also an attacker of religion, with frequent articles either against the Church or against its ministers. The Ruriko came out with stories of vices said to be practiced by parsons. July 17th, 1931. The Rotvan published a series of articles entitled Behind the Curtain in the Churches, June 25th, 1931. Rectories were damaged by mobs of hooligans, and ministers were frequently insulted or assaulted in the street. A communist song taught the people to, quote, smear the guillotine with the fat of tyrants, tear the concubine out of the priest's bed, end quote. When a certain Dr. Koenig brought out a book containing sentences like these, the Christian Church considers marriage in the light of swinishness. The Church is responsible for filth and misery. The government saw fit to intervene, and Koenig was arrested, but his lawyer obtained an acquittal. Berlin even saw an Antichrist exhibition open near the Potsdamer Platz when the chief exhibit was a life-size figure of the Pope with a pistol in one hand, a crucifix in the other. Space does not allow a full detailed description of Germany's anti-religious movements. They were extremely powerful and were fast threatening to lead the Reich towards the atheism of the Soviet Union. Although there have been dissensions within the German Church of late, a fight between the moderates and extremists, religion, is no longer open to the unrestricted attack of Bolshevism and godlessness. Things are different nowadays. Now you can pick up a newspaper without seeing lewd caricatures of church ministers. You can walk around the streets without being accosted by scores of male streetwalkers. You can go to a nightclub and expect to see nothing worse than the usual vulgarity. A very strict censorship is in force, and you can let your children go to the bookstalls without fearing that they will come away with a copy of a book on homosexuality. The very air you breathe is purer. For cleaning up Germany, and for his attempts to abolish criminality and corruption, Hitler deserves a little praise. There are, presumably, still a few decent-minded men and women who are able to appreciate his efforts and stem the flood of immorality which has been submerging the world for the last 15 years. On the subject of the Nazi fight against degeneration, it is interesting to see how their attitude has affected the German stage. Plays of a morbid character, like those of Strindberg, and frivolous or immoral plays are strictly banned. In their place come dramas glorifying incidents and national history, or recent events like the plays Landmark and Schlageter. Landmark glorifies the heroic deeds of certain German students' regiments during the Great War. It played to large audiences in Berlin for a long time. Schlageter, by Hans Jost, was an outstanding success. It deals with incidents in the life of a young war officer named Schlageter, who, in 1923, took an active part in organizing violent resistance against the French occupation of the Ruhr. He organized sabotage parties to blow up bridges and railway lines until eventually he was betrayed and shot by the French authorities. Schlageter became a national hero. A memorial was erected in his memory, and Herr Jost's play brought him back into prominence. Inexplicable contrasts are frequent under Nazi rule. Side by side with the obviously anti-French play described above was another big success called Am Himmel Europas, in Europe's Sky, which deals with life in an aviation camp where young French and German students learned to fly in air gliders. Although this play was billed as a comedy, it had a very serious foundation, which was the furtherance of Franco-German cooperation and understanding. These three plays are characteristic of the new theatrical tendencies born of nationalism. The huge public success of dramas exalting deeds of heroism shows the Germans' reaction against cynical materialism by an appreciation of the heroic life, the deprivation of which, in modern times, was starving his soul, as it is doing all over the world. Concurrently, Germans still enjoy the type of light musical comedy which is popular the world over. Dr. Med Heel Praetorius by Kurt Goetz was also a great success. When it is explained that Kurt Goetz is the German equivalent of Noel Coward in England, it is obvious that theater-going Germans have not completely changed their inclinations. As to the players, the application of the Nazi Aryan clause was bound to bring a change in the theatrical profession itself. An outstanding example is Elisabeth Bergner, a Jewish actress of exceptional talent. There is no one in Germany today who can take Elisabeth Bergner's place, and theatergoers regret her banishment. Several people told me that if she were to come back to the State Theater tomorrow, there would not be a single seat left vacant. The Nazis are hopeful of finding her a successor among the young actresses of talent, like Marie-Louise Claudius, Karsta Lurk, and others. But this process of selection will take some time, and meanwhile, the German stage is deprived of a truly great feminine star. The same loss is not apparent in the ranks of the masculine stars. Although great actors like Kortner and Moisey were banned, the public still have Werner Krauss, Bosserman, Heinrich George, and Emil Jannings, all of whom are too well known to require explanation. Reinhardt is the notable producer who incurred Nazi displeasure. His place has been taken by Herr Aschaz Duisberg, who is undoubtedly a very able producer, but generally admitted to be in a lower class than the genius of Reinhardt. In all fairness, it must be admitted that even before Hitler's advent, Reinhardt's glory was rapidly fading. His art and style had outlived themselves, and he was unable to adapt himself to modern taste and technique. Besides the type of plays described, there is another type which is becoming increasingly popular, and which can best be described as rustic comedy. A comedy like Herr Hinrich's When the Cock Crows gives a very humorous and realistic insight into the life of the small German peasant, is typical of the new tendency. For some considerable time, the German theaters were in the doldrums, and Nazi rule, with its initial muddles and contradictions, did nothing to help the commercial side of the stage. Consequently, there was a substantial reduction in the salaries paid to stars, especially the huge sums which artists like Richard Tauber used to receive for single performances. One of the most significant and interesting changes made by the Nazis lies in the fact that theatrical or film star salaries are no longer allowed to be published in the daily press. This is intended to destroy one source of dissatisfaction. Oh, I just got an error from YouTube, but I'm still green on OBS, so I think we're good. Maybe. Oh, I just moved this to. Whoops. I'll bring it back. All right. Where was I? Sorry about that. I just saw a warning on YouTube, and I wanted to look at it. It was just saying that the bit rate was lower than recommended. Okay, so yeah, salaries were no longer allowed to be published in the daily press. This is intended to destroy one source of dissatisfaction among the poorer classes, who are bound to feel disgruntled when reading of the enormous sums earned, apparently without effort, by stars. Altogether, the German stage is still going through a period of uncertain transition, and it is impossible to predict what the ultimate result of the change will be. Tendencies seem to show that the stage of the immediate future will be devoid of any plays of the so-called highbrow variety. No more frivolous comedies of doubtful morality. No more dramas describing or exalting the exploits of the underworld. In their place will come plays extolling the virtue of bravery and patriotism, like those which originally found favor with the Greeks, and flanked by light musical comedies and comedies portraying the various humorous aspects of German national life. Next to Nazi censorship of the entertainment industry comes the condemnation of jazz. Not a very stringent condemnation, it is true, but nevertheless a definite discouragement of popular dance music, which found a stricter expression in the provincial towns and villages. Although one can still find a great number of jazz bands in Nazi Germany, it would seem that the propaganda ministry and its chamber of culture are making an effort to wean the nation away from the type of music which is still popular with other nations. The authorities, realizing that music is one of the mainstays of human culture, are attempting to replace barbaric rhythm by more civilized melody. Quote, "Let me make a nation's songs, and I care not who makes the laws," end quote, said one. And that is why the Nazis are endeavoring to create a national form of music to replace international jazz. Quote, "Music began among primitive people in sheer unrelieved rhythm, which made a whole tribe move unthinkingly as one, chanting sounds without meaning. Then, as the tribe developed into a collection of individuals of dawning intelligence, music developed order as well. Melody came to control rhythm. Meaningless vocables were replaced by more or less intelligible songs. Wild orgies gave way to patterned ceremonial dances." End quote. Although jazz has for many years been accepted as part of everyday life all over the world, it is time a general reaction took place because, quote, "If civilization is to go forward, it must do so to the accompaniment of music that expresses progressive ideals, and not a music which monotonously echoes jungle thoughtlessness and savagery." End quote. Hitler's effort to destroy the popularity of jazz in Germany is a welcome change from the indulgent acquiescence with which primeval jungle rhythm is accepted by all classes, including the so-called intelligentsia. Monkey talk, jungle squeals, grunts, and squeaks are camouflaged by a few feverish notes emitted to homes of respectable citizens. The sly suggestion of abandoned sensuousness of the majority of dance songs makes them outstanding examples of human culture. The words of these songs, if read out without the addition of the music, are not infrequently distinctly lewd and sprinkled with coarse or suggestive expressions. People are hypnotized by the atmosphere which the words create when sung, all laboring under the pleasant delusion that a little flashy music covers a multitude of sins. A good test for a song is to try and read it aloud in cold type. Of course, jazz, like immoral plays, was blamed on the war. It was a reaction. In that case, it is time the world indulged in another phase of reaction. In the realm of music, a reaction which might possibly advance the cause of culture a little further than jazz has done in the last quarter of a century. All right, and that's the end of this chapter. And it looks like we're a little cut off here. I'll move this again. I had this like perfectly centered. I think that's good. Stupid display capture. See, again, a lot of very familiar things in this chapter. But it's funny to talk about jazz music in a lot of these old publications. I mean, what would these people think if they heard "Wet Ass Pussy" on the radio? We've certainly degenerated further since then. I mean, nowadays you'd have someone who's very conservative listen to jazz and be like, "Man, remember the good old days?" All right, chapter 3. Crime and corruption. How long is this chapter? All right, it's pretty short. We'll probably end after this one. Arithmetic, ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision, the mock turtle replied. With the country in a state of political and economic chaos, amazingly well-organized communism gradually Sovietizing the state and subversive forces at work destroying morality and religion, it would seem that Germany's cup of bitterness was full to overflowing. But there is more to come. To complete the picture of putridness and vitiation, a growing crime wave and wholesale graft must be included. That crime should have flourished as it did is not surprising. The huge number of young unemployed contributed to the rise in the number of assaults, petty larcenies, and robberies with violence. Young men of the working class stood on street corners all day long, their hands in their pockets, nothing to do, and no prospect of work. They lived like that not for days or weeks, but for months and sometimes years. In the street, these men naturally formed groups, which within a short time became organized gangs of petty criminals. In 1932, some of the police courts were unable to deal with the overwhelming number of arrests for thieving, housebreaking, pickpocketing, and assault. In Berlin and Hamburg, there were many streets which at night were positively dangerous. Admitted that there are such streets in every big city, but as a rule, they are confined to certain well-known areas such as La Villette in Paris and Hell's Kitchen in New York. But in Berlin and in larger provincial towns, normally quiet residential districts became meeting grounds for gangs of hooligans. In Mariendorf, a small middle-class district where one would least expect hooliganism, the number of arrests for assault in 1932 was put down at over 800, nearly 3 a day. A shopkeeper in that district of Berlin told me that for 2 years before Hitler, he never went out in the street without carrying a rubber truncheon. Thousands of other respectable citizens were obliged to do the same. Shop windows were smashed and goods stolen so frequently that most of the shops of any importance were obliged to put up wire screens to protect their displays. It must be chronicled, in all fairness, that stormtroopers did some window smashing on their own account, but not for loot. The big department store belonging to the Jew Wertheim was particularly unfortunate with its windows. The glass that was smashed by communists or hooligans was replaced, but a few months later, during the one-day Jewish boycott, some enthusiastic stormtroopers smashed it again. In the case of the hooligan gangs, they very often did not take the trouble to smash windows. They simply rushed into a shop en masse and helped themselves. Extracts from newspapers of the time, 1932 and January 1933, show how bold these gangs had become. Quote, "Yesterday afternoon, about 2 o'clock, a gang of unemployed stormed the shop of the Nordstern firm in the Glasgower Strasse and robbed the counters of several hundred marks worth of goods. The police were unable to make any arrests." End quote. Another incident of the same sort, quote, "At 12 o'clock midday, about 10 young toughs rushed into the shop belonging to Gerbel and Company in the Nobeldorfer Strasse and stole whatever they could find. They managed to escape with their loot without being recognized." End quote. And another, this time robbery for food, quote, "Yesterday evening, a crowd of unemployed stormed the provision store of Hoffman in the Grafstrasse and made off with sausages and lard in large quantities. There were no arrests." End quote. Unemployment, however, was not the only cause of the crime wave. The two are not necessarily conjunctive, as England has shown. Another influence was at work in Germany, which tended to educate and encourage youth in the ways of crime. The exploits of gangsters and crooks were glorified on the stage, in the cinemas, and in innumerable publications. A film like the UFA production of Murder is at the head of a long list of other films of the same order, whose sole object was the exaltation of the underworld. At the same time, bookstalls were flooded with cheap periodicals dealing with every kind of law-breaking, generally called crime magazines. What could be the logical result of this propaganda? If a young man of moderately low mentality reads about the heroic exploits of thieves and murderers day in and day out, and at the same time he is unemployed and has no money, is it not safe to assume that sooner or later he will feel inclined to commit a crime? Left alone, he might never have sufficient courage to do so, but as a member of a street gang, he is a potential danger to society. The crime glorification propaganda should have been abolished long before Hitler, but neither the Brüning nor the Schleicher government took any notice of what was going on. That was hardly surprising, because the lower classes were indulging in hooliganism, the ruling classes were busy raking in graft money. Graft in government offices, graft in industrial and commercial concerns, graft in the police force, graft everywhere. The biggest graft scandal in history, or in German history, was that of the Osthilfe, East Relief Fund. Although it was only one of many cases of corruption, it was such a serious affair that even a liberal government was forced to institute an inquiry. The exposure was made in January 1933, just before Hitler became chancellor. The modus operandi of the Osthilfe was quite simple. For some years, the large estates belonging to Junkers, the landed gentry, had fallen into such a state of disrepair that the government were moved to vote a relief fund of 2.5 billion marks to help not only the Junkers, but the thousands of peasants and farmers on the estates. It must be said, en passant, that in many cases the deterioration of huge properties was entirely the proprietor's fault. Money spent on luxurious living being the cause. The Osthilfe Fund, however, was meant to remedy the situation. The estates would be put in order, agricultural machinery would be bought, and tenants' dwellings repaired. None of the sort took place. Landowners either swindled the state by selling its worthless land, or else they spent their share of the fund on their own pleasure. One man made about 600,000 marks, another one pocketed 300,000 marks. Officials appointed to distribute and control the funds were not forgotten. They appropriated a few thousand marks on their own account. Everybody had a dip in the Osthilfe millions, excepting, of course, the tenants on the estates who continued to live in dilapidated cottages, tilled the soil with what implements they could find, and managed to starve on the rapidly decreasing harvests. Things grew so bad that the government was obliged to take action. The Social Democrat and Communist press, which never missed an opportunity of attacking the aristocracy, smeared the scandal across their columns with red ink. When finally a committee was formed in the Reichstag and the inquiry began, the revelations were appalling. Scores of prominent men were involved. Newspapers printed special editions hourly to give the latest names of those who had a finger in the pie. Landowners, businessmen, and government officials did not escape the mud that was thrown in every direction. The only ones to benefit by the affair were the communists, who used the legitimate fury of the proletariat as a means of increasing the membership of the party. Another illuminating scandal was the one that burst over Berlin in 1932. Brothers Leo and Willy Sklarek, plain, honest members of the chosen race, had found a way of making the Berlin Municipal Bank funds pour into their pockets. Thanks to friends in the municipal council, Brothers Sklarek, kings of the clothing trade, obtained all the contracts for supplying uniforms to the employees of the various municipal services. In Germany, tram and bus conductors, post office clerks, underground railway guards, policemen, firemen, and street cleaners all wear elaborate uniforms, so the municipal council determined the cost of each uniform, collected the ratepayers' money on the basis of their calculation, and then arranged with the Sklarek firm that uniforms should be supplied at a cheaper price than that for which they had been budgeted, obviously entailing lower quality. The arrangement became a goldmine. Leo and Willie made about 12.5 million marks out of it. Clear profit after deduction of fees to town councilors, clerks, officials, and all those who required squaring. In the trial later on, it came out that Leo had made a habit of sending various officials a half dozen new suits at Christmas, while Willie was clever enough to rob the Berlin Municipal Bank of a final 475,000 marks the day before he and his brothers were arrested. During the trial, more mud was thrown at prominent men, but this time instead of the Junkers, the Social Democrats were most heavily spattered. Then there was Herr General Director Ludwig Katzenellenbogen, the managing director of the Schultheiss-Patzenhofer Brewery. Head of a concern with a capital of 75 million marks and a reserve capital of another 15 million marks, Ludwig Katzelbo's literal translation of his name, managed to defraud the shareholders of the brewery of some 30 million marks. Foolish speculation was the cause, but unkind evidence at the trial. Piscator, who was subsequently reputed to have gone back to Russia, got 500,000 marks for himself. After a long and complicated trial, Herr Katzenellenbogen went to join his co-religionists, the Sklarek brothers, in prison. When later, Hitler declared war on corruption, many more cases of graft came to light. How many others still exist in Germany today? And how many are there in the whole world? In the last 2 years, nearly every large country has had its graft scandal. The Stavisky affair in France showed up corruption in the cabinet. Belgium discovered graft in the police force. The United States, even England, with its traditional honesty and straightforwardness, had a big scandal in the shape of Leopold Harris and the fire insurance frauds. It would seem that Germany was not the only country that required a thorough cleaning. Damn, not the sausages? Yeah, those thieves took the sausages. I can't believe it. That was the Great German Empire at the beginning of 1933. I have tried to reconstruct the stage on which Hitler was to play his part. Great religious or economic movements are not born without a reason. They are usually reactions against existing conditions. Liberalism was the natural reaction against the unjust restrictions of despotism. National Socialism was Germany's reply to the disintegration brought by liberalism. It is obvious that the conditions I have attempted to describe could not continue to exist without eventually leading the Reich into anarchy and annihilation. The last 4 months before Hitler became Chancellor witnessed the deathbed struggles of liberalism and its offspring, parliamentary government. The Brüning government, formed in March 1930, had weighed down the workers and farmers with intolerable burdens. The elections of 1930 gave the Communists 600,000 votes, whereas in 1932 they obtained over 6 million. Brüning was followed by the Papen-Schleicher government, which in turn increased the existing chaos by becoming further entangled in a morass of new laws, emergency decrees, and so on, until Papen's economic program provided the proverbial straw to break the camel's back. Papen fell in November 1932, and Schleicher retained supreme command. By this time, the National Socialist Party had become an enormously strong power. Papen, who very much resented having been kicked out by Schleicher, started negotiating with Hitler to bring him into the government. Schleicher sat around and did nothing except add a few more emergency decrees to the ones Papen had promulgated. While political intrigues became more and more complicated, a free fight went on for the control of several powerful newspapers. Schleicher got hold of the Tagliche Rundschau, formerly owned by Strassmann Papen. Papen fought to get the Berliner Tageblatt, and the big newspaper concerns like Ulstein became the center of controversy. On January 28, 1933, the Schleicher government was forced to resign. The tension was terrific, and it is said that Schleicher spent the whole night of January 29th trying to decide whether he should declare a military dictatorship and occupy Berlin with soldiers from Potsdam. It was too late to do anything then, because the morning of January 30th, President of the Republic, von Hindenburg, appointed Hitler as Chancellor of the Reich. With him came von Papen as Commissioner for Prussia, Baron von Neurath as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Frick, Minister of the Interior, General Werner von Blomberg, Minister of War, and Count Schwerin von Krosigk became Minister of Finance. Stahlhelm leader Franz Selt, Baron Els von Rubinbach, General Hermann Göring, and Alfred Hugenberg all came in with Hitler. So far, there was nothing to indicate that Hitler intended to make a coup d'etat. People presumed that he would be satisfied with his new position and await the result of the Reichstag election on March 5th. Anti-Nazi feeling, however, began to run high. The Communists approached the Social Democrats and the Grand Council of Trade Unions with the idea of forming a coalition to overthrow the Hitler government by a general strike. The Social Democrats, who did not think Hitler could last very long in any case, refused the Communist offer of revolt, as did the trade unions. Lacking the official support of the Social Democrats, the Communist Party was reduced to creating disturbances throughout the country. In the Ruhr, the Rhineland, Berlin, and in particular Hamburg, the Communist stronghold, violent battles took place between stormtroopers and Reds, and the press of the left filled its pages with tales of atrocities committed by fascist brown devils. Lurid headlines proclaimed the menace of that madman Hitler. On February 10th, Hitler made a speech in the Sports Palace of Berlin, giving details of his government's program. Particular stress was laid on the proposed measures for relief of unemployment, which then stood at about 8 million. The Communists were not impressed, but apart from redoubling their anti-Nazi propaganda in the press and organizing occasional riots, they seemed to be taking things quietly. On February 24th, one startling event followed another at a bewildering pace. The Karl-Liebknecht-Haus in Berlin, the headquarters of the Communist Party, was raided by the police, who seized a quantity of treasonable literature. The Nazi press and all the newspapers published front-page reports of communist plans for an anarchist revolution. How far these reports were true, it is difficult to say. Details of communist plots were undoubtedly found by the police, but their importance may have been a little exaggerated by the then over-enthusiastic Nazis. The public who, as usual, believed every word in its newspapers, was stunned. The small middle class, who had never quite realized the danger of Bolshevism, took fright and sent their men to swell the ranks of Göring's newly established special police. People went round the streets with strained expressions, expecting bomb explosions, and they knew not what else at any moment. The excitement in Berlin was so intense that when a small fire broke out in the Schloss, it was attributed to communists, and public fury rose to a high pitch. On February 26, nothing happened. the press continued to publish details of communist plots, many shopkeepers shut up their shops and stayed at home to await developments, while crowds stood in the streets of the cities excitedly discussing the latest news. And then, at 9 o'clock on the evening of February 27th, the Reichstag of Berlin went up in flames. And I think we'll leave it on that cliffhanger for today. And I'll be streaming tomorrow, probably around the same time, and we'll pick up here for the Reichstag fire, which it'll be interesting to see what he says about it. You still hear all kinds of different stories about it. I did read an essay a couple of years ago on the Reichstag fire, and that remains to me to be the most convincing literature on the topic that I've read. It was in, what's his name? Henry Ashby Turner. He has a compilation of essays called Nazism in the Third Reich, and it's all backed up by like primary sources. So it's a pretty useful resource. If you can find it, I recommend it. But I'll probably talk about that more tomorrow when we actually discuss this topic. Yeah, he's kind of established a background here on how life was in Weimar Germany. We can see a lot of parallels to our society today. And it's like he said at the beginning, something had to happen. And I think that's kind of the same here in our times today. Something has to happen at some point. I mean, I think that's kind of obvious. Like, you have the nothing ever happens crowd, but I think we are just kind of reaching that point where something is going to happen. I don't know what. And I think when we look at these old books and these kind of taboo topics, we can learn about what could happen and how to make it different. Take some lessons and leave some things behind. But yeah, that's why I wanted to read this, because it gives a unique perspective into this small window of time where people weren't like emotionally attached to the idea of Nazis, at least not as much as they are today or later on after or during the war. Because he's talking about, actual policies and things that were enacted and, maybe improve society for the better, maybe for the worse, or, there's a trade-off like with the acting and, the movies that he was talking about where, they got all the degeneracy out of the theaters, but then without any of the Jewish actors, they lost a lot of their, big talented actors because they banned Jews. So, there are lessons to be learned for sure. Which is kind of the whole idea behind the whole banned books week thing, or the banned books trend, which I've talked about this a million times. It's a stupid trend, but I think the idea behind it is a legitimate one. And that's what that's why I'm doing this. So thank you for everyone who came by, Elephant Puppet, Zombie Jano, Shady Crunchum, and anyone else who is lurking. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you join me again to finish reading this. Like I said, we're going to finish this week. It's only about 200 pages, a little over 200, like 210 or so. And we're already at 46. I have tomorrow off, so I'll be reading a decent amount tomorrow as well. But during the week when I work, it'll be a little shorter. But I do think we'll be able to finish. So thank you for being with me again today, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye.